London was a circuit that appeared first on Gran Turismo 5 Prologue, before going on to appear on Gran Turismo 5 and 6. It's curious for several reasons. Firstly, it's very short, at just 1.19 miles or 1.92 kilometers in length. It also uses real-life streets of London, at least how they looked back when GT5 Prologue was released, in December 2007 in Japan to begin with. London also has no pit lane, so it can't be used for any race that's run over a number of laps, especially no endurance races. Before we get any further, let's remind ourselves what the London track looks like. Across the start-finish straight and now braking hard into the first corner. It's a hairpin right and it's difficult to spot your braking for this one. Now we're heading down Charing Cross Road, past some of the landmarks that surround this circuit, with the National Picture House on the right, and then we go through this left-right section pretty quickly, nearly hitting the wall there, braking hard, hugging the apex around Trafalgar Square. Now coming up to another twisty section here, we've got the first of 3 difficult turns. First being a right, and then the second is a left, hopping over the curb there, getting fairly close to the wall, and then a right turn. Again, you can abuse the curbs here as much as you like. And then we run up to the final corner, which is at Piccadilly Circus, hopping over 1 curb, 2 curbs, and 3 curbs, and then it's a run to the line. So, what's going on here? To understand London circuit better, we need to go back to 2008, where GT Series creator Kazunori Yamauchi did an interview with Martin Robinson of IGN. At one point, Martin asked, "You've got a London track in Prologue that looks absolutely lush. We often fantasize about what course a London GP would take. How did you come up with the layout?" And Kaz replied, "I come to London very often, and I've walked the streets and I know them. So that helped a lot. The course that we have in the game at the moment is actually half the size that we originally thought. It's a short course basically, so in Gran Turismo 5 we'll have the longer course in there." So there you go. The London circuit we got was only intended to be the short course, with a bigger version planned that would have allegedly been twice the size of it. So, what would this longer track have looked like? And while we can't be absolutely certain, there are at least a few clues left in the game. Back in 2009, GT fans began to speculate what a longer London circuit would look like, and they consulted the course guide video for clues. This video features real-life footage of London, likely taken back in or around 2007. In addition to showcasing landmarks such as Piccadilly Circus, which do appear on the short course, the video also showcased landmarks that weren't on the route of the circuit we saw in GT5 Prologue and beyond. Examples include the River Thames, the London Eye, the gates of Buckingham Palace, and even the Houses of Parliament, which can only be seen in the distant scenery of the course. At the time, people speculated on whether a longer course could incorporate some of these places. Here's one example from a user on GT Planet called Car Bastard, which actually crosses the River Thames twice. However, part of this potential circuit was pedestrianised, and one of the bridges that was used was for trains only. And as more people joined the discussion, every track that was proposed all broke away from the short course at the same place, near Trafalgar Square. One potential issue with this is that it would have to go through Admiralty Arch, which has 3 separate passages through it, which is perhaps a bit more Mario Kart than Gran Turismo. Regardless, it would turn out that they were looking in completely the wrong place. Sometime later, people worked out that if the track was viewed using an external editor, it was possible to see collision data for not just the short course, but for the scrapped longer course as well. And that means we can see roughly where the full course would have gone. So thank you to Nebux72 from GT Planet for sharing this with us. And here it is. The playable track is highlighted, while the other areas that have collision data are the bits that are outlined in black. As we can see here, the circuit would have extended from the top of it, rather than the bottom near Trafalgar Square. So the course guide video wasn't the clue that we thought it was. At the left hand side of the image, we can see that the full course would have gone left, where the final corner on the short course turns right onto the start-finish straight. And it would have rejoined at the other end of the start-finish straight at the first corner. Before we take a look at the long circuit in full, you might have seen another section of the track has collision data, which is this area here. This is perhaps because this area was used for the pit lane on GT5 Prologue, and I say pit lane with inverted commas. It wasn't a pit lane in the normal sense, but it was used as the area where your car is shown prior to the race beginning. What's interesting is that during the race itself, all the tents, mechanics and crowds are gone, just leaving this space instead. As I mentioned before, there isn't a pit lane which can be used during the race, but could this street have been used? It links back up with the circuit near the final corner, but it would make for a tight turn to get back on the course. Okay, so let's check out where the long course would have gone. So at the first point where we leave the circuit near the final corner of the short course, we head down Regent Street. This is a famous London street which was even featured in Monopoly. And we can see that the buildings here are all actually in high-res textures, much like the buildings along the playable circuit. Compare this to the row of buildings on the adjacent street, and you can see the stark contrast in quality between the buildings that were intended to be part of the scenery and ones which would have run along the playable track. Going towards the end of this section of Regent Street that's textured, the road itself actually does go on a little further down than you might expect. You can even see the curbs on the playable track seem to be pointing in this direction, giving us another clue that this is where the long course would have branched off. On GT5 Prologue, this area seems to have been more detailed, with buses on the right hand side there which didn't exist on the full release of GT5. At the other end of the start-finish straight, which is actually Shaftesbury Avenue, this is another spot which would have linked this track to the long course. It's essentially the continuation of Charing Cross Road, another section of the same street that forms part of the short course. You go under these trees here and through this photo that has been used for the backdrop for the scenery, to find that the road does simply carry on further than you might have expected. You can also see that there's an additional building out here, which is the Centre Point building. If we take a look at both sections together, it looks like this. So how would these two sections have linked up with one another? And while we can't see any further on the game, we can take the collision data for the full track and map it onto the streets of London. We can see that we would have continued along Regent Street until we reached Oxford Circus. Then we would have turned right onto the A40, then right again down to Charing Cross Road, where we would have met up with the short course again. Now another question that remains is, how would the long and short courses have combined? Some people have suggested that the existing start-finish straight would have been used to link these two sections, and would have looked something like this. However, something I personally believe is more likely is that the two circuits would have joined up like this, essentially to get the best of both worlds and create a circuit comprised of the short course and the long course. This could also explain why there isn't a pit lane on the London circuit, if the start-finish straight was a stand-in, and rather the actual start-finish straight could have been up here on the A40 instead. It's a wider road and a straighter road, and therefore seems like the best option to house a pit lane. So join me now as we take a journey on Google Street View along the probable route of the original full London circuit. We start near Piccadilly Circus, and instead of turning right onto Shaftesbury Avenue, we're going to go left onto Regent Street. We're going to go all the way up to Oxford Circus, which is actually pretty far. Can you imagine how much speed you'd build up here, especially in something like the Red Bull X 2010? You might notice that there's a path that runs between each side of the road. Presumably this would have been removed from the circuit in the game. In terms of Regent Street itself, it's an area of London where you can find upmarket shops, and part of it runs adjacent to Carnaby Street, which was the epicentre of the fashion revolution in the 60s. We now approach Oxford Circus, similar in name to Piccadilly Circus of course. The word circus is derived from the Latin name for circle, which is circulus. And now we take a 90-degree right turn onto the A40. Throughout this journey, we are bordering the Soho district of London, which is famous for being a trendy hub of entertainment values, including bars, restaurants and theatres. Alike to Regent Street, the A40 has lots of shops on either side. We'll also pass the first of two tube stations, the first being Tottenham Court Road Elizabeth Line station. The A40 itself was built to connect London to Wales. Yes, that's right, the road that we're on stretches all the way to Wales in various forms. But we're actually heading in the opposite direction here, further to the east rather than the west. Coming to the end of the section of the circuit that runs on the A40, we take another right angle turn onto Charing Cross Road. At this junction is the second of two tube stations, the main Tottenham Court Road station. Charing Cross Road houses many second-hand bookshops, and there are also several theatres located on or near here. On the right here is the Palace Theatre, and as we pass through this crossroads, we are now back on the route of the short course. I love all the trees down this road. And this is still Charing Cross Road, by the way. It continues past the crossroads we just drove through. As we head further down, we'll be able to see some landmarks that lie right on the track's boundaries. On the right here, we can see the National Gallery, housing art from the 13th to the 19th centuries. And on the left is the Edith Cavell Memorial, a famous nurse from World War I. Next to this is St. Martin in the Fields, a beautiful Georgian church. Then we circle around Trafalgar Square and Nelson's Column, a famous spot in London which celebrates Admiral Nelson's victory at the Battle of Trafalgar against the Spanish Armada in 1805. Across the road from here is Admiralty Arch, a landmark London building which has historically housed government offices. And on GT5, you can actually see the Houses of Parliament in the distance, otherwise known as Westminster. And incidentally, next to Westminster is a dev cube, a reference object which was used while building the game. Okay, continuing our journey. As we go around the Charles I roundabout, we head onto Cockspur Street. Number 1 Oceanic House is situated on the right, and was originally the London office of the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company, trading as the White Star Line, which operated famous liners including the RMS Titanic. Then we turn right onto Haymarket, and then we quickly turn left onto Charles II Street. Of course, we now have King Charles III as our monarch. We've not had a Charles on the throne since 1685, when Charles II died. At the end of the street, if we look left, we can see the Guards' Crimean War Memorial. It was unveiled in 1861 and commemorates the Allied victory in the Crimean War. If we look straight ahead, we can see one of the entrances to St James's Square, a public garden surrounded by Georgian facades. As we're following the route of the circuit, we turn right here instead. And we're now on Regent Street St James's, the road that we began our journey on. It's home to several hotels and restaurants. And as we continue north, we now approach Piccadilly Circus once more, back to where we began, with the Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain on the right hand side, topped with a statue of Eros. And there we go, a lap of what the full London circuit probably looked like. So, why was it cut? Well, even though we have the route of the full circuit where we have the collision data as a guide, we simply don't know why it was cut. One theory though, is that the portion of the track that was cut was, well, perhaps a bit boring. On paper, it only has 2 main 90-degree corners. Otherwise, it's pretty straight, apart from the slight bend of Regent Street. But the distance between Oxford Circus and Tottenham Court Road is half a mile. So imagine the feeling of driving down the A40 as fast as you can, without the ever-present London traffic. Personally, I think that would have made it all worthwhile. And on that bombshell, it's time to end the video. Thank you to the GT Planet community, and thank you all for watching.